Lessons from Books, Race and Economics by Walter E. Williams. The New Deal was racist. I know it sounds like clickbait, but trust me, it's true. Please subscribe, share, like the videos. Progressives, Kyle Kulinski, Crystal Ball, Jimmy Dore. I enjoy them. I think they bring up some good points. I'm not a progressive, but I still enjoy their show. But one of their biggest weaknesses is when it comes to the New Deal. They love big government, but they don't understand big government. Their understanding of the New Deal is basically a middle school history class, or maybe they had a liberal history professor in college, but they've never looked at it from a conservative point of view. But more importantly, they've never looked at the New Deal from the lens of an economist. So that's what we're going to do. What does Walter E. Williams, the economist, say about the New Deal when he says it's racist? We're going to focus mainly on the NRA, the National Recovery Act, the cornerstone of the New Deal. So FDR's New Deal, the backbone of it was the NRA. And one of the things that the NRA established was a minimum wage. If you want to see more about minimum wage videos, check out my Thomas Sowell video or my other Walter E. Williams video. We'll talk a little bit about it here. So let's say there's a $15 minimum wage. You got to pay the white worker $15 or the minority or black worker $15. And this is the example that Walter E. Williams gives. Let's say that this boss has nothing but white employees in his workplace. He wants his workplace to continue to go smoothly, and so he's going to choose more than likely to hire the white worker. It's according to Walter E. Williams. If you don't believe that, that's fine. I'm going to give you plenty more examples, but you can understand whether you accept that or not. You can understand the rationale here by Walter E. Williams. Whether you agree with that or not, that's fine. We're going to move on to some more examples. What if there wasn't a minimum wage? The NRA did not exist, and the black worker could compensate for the differences in skill. And this is in my other video where Walter E. Williams in Race and Economics talks about compensating differences. In order to get the job, he can try to work for lower wages. Now, the boss is more likely going to say, hey, I don't care about the workflow. I don't care if you employees can't get along. I don't care if you employees are racist. I would much rather employ someone at lower wages, will increase my profits, and will be better for my business. So by allowing for the minority or the low-skilled worker or the youth worker to work for less, they now have an opportunity to compensate for their inadequacies or the less skill that they have. But the NRA says, no, you can't do it. There's going to be a $15 minimum wage. Therefore, minorities, youth, low-skilled workers are not going to get the job. In most cases, the boss is going to hire the higher skilled worker or the worker that's actually worth $15. Give you another example. So let's imagine that this boss in this scenario, 8 times 4 is what, 32. So let's assume he's got $40 to spend towards wages, and he can do that on a normal day. Well, then the NRA institutes a minimum wage at $15 an hour. He's going to have to release employees. Just because you say you have to pay someone doesn't magically create money. It doesn't mean that we're going to magically keep hiring the same amount of workers. If now he's going to spend $15 an hour, well, he can only pay $40 per hour for wages, so he has to let 2 workers go. This is, again, the economist's perspective, or the businessman's perspective. He has to make profits to stay in business. The government can tell you, you got to make X amount of money. They can institute minimum wage all they want, but the government is not forcing any of these employers to hire people. Oh, I've got to pay $15 an hour? Well, I'm going to choose to only hire 2. For now. Maybe eventually the government's going to force people to hire people and and essentially playing government, that's what you get. But thank goodness we're not complete communists yet. And so although the government tries to institute a minimum wage, they cannot force you to hire someone. So they can make a boss pay you $15 an hour, but they can't make the boss hire you. And so what happens is either A, people don't get hired, or B, they get fired. Good job, New Deal. And who does this impact the most? Low-skilled workers, which tend to be minorities, and the youth. And it's pretty clear when you look at the data, which is the craziest thing, when you see the progressives, the liberals talk about the success of the New Deal, you just look at the numbers and you see the entire Great Depression, the unemployment rate was through the freaking roof. I mean, whatever they want to believe, whatever you were taught in middle school, you can't hide the numbers. You can't hide the data. It was bad. And when did it get good? It got good when they got rid of the New Deal. When Roosevelt and the government abandoned most of the New Deal social engineering, all this planning, then guess what? The economy recovered. And you're saying, oh, well, it's because of the war. Yeah, because when the war happened, it's kind of an important thing. It was time to end the games. It was time to live in dream world, in fantasy land. And you know what Roosevelt did when things got serious? He fired the New Dealers. He got rid of the socialists. He got rid of the progressives. All the New Dealers in his cabinet that were coming up with these goofy plans that were failing, He got rid of them all, replaced them with real businessmen, real people that knew how the real world worked because, hey, I got to win the war and I've got to balance the economy. Time to end the games, to put the ideology aside, and we have to preserve the Union, and it worked out pretty well. So the NRA sets up, basically gives the union workers what they want, which is a minimum wage. Now, when we say minimum wage, you get this idea, well, it's the bare minimum. Oh boy, well, hope they're able to survive. But that's not really what's happening. What the NRA is setting up for these unions is giving them a raise and also giving them job security. So you hear minimum wage, we're not really talking about a minimum wage in the way that you interpret it today with a fast food worker. What we're talking about is basically giving people in the union, in the club, in the secret society, well, it's not secret society, but in that special group, giving them wages increases, but more importantly, we're giving them job security. What is the job security? So you look at Roy Wilkins of the NAACP basically says that in the NRA was simply just pushing blacks out of office, pushing blacks out of industry and not allowing them into industry. It was really this job security thing here. By setting the minimum wage, by forcing employers to pay a certain amount of money, blacks could no longer compete with white workers. So we showed the example before where minorities and youth and blacks could say, well, if you're paying for $15, I'll take $8. And that was a way to make up for compensating differences. I have a YouTube video where we talk about compensating differences. Check out the minimum wage meet. But he's onto it. Everyone's onto it. Everyone is like, this isn't about minimum wage. This isn't about helping people survive. This is about helping the union workers, mainly the white workers, have job security so they don't have to compete against minorities. So they don't have to compete against Hispanics. So they don't have to compete against blacks. They don't have to compete against youth. You're protecting people and pushing blacks out of work. You're keeping blacks from getting a job. And here's what the black press had to say. What did the black press have to say during this time? What did they refer to the NRA as? They didn't call it the National Recovery Act. They called it the Negro Runaround, Negroes Rarely Allowed, Negroes Ruined Again, Negroes Robbed Again, No Roosevelt Again, Negro Removal Act. Doesn't seem like those are very fond terms. It doesn't seem like black Americans liked the NRA too much. And of course they didn't. It prevented them from getting jobs. It protected white people. The New Deal was racist. Herbert Hill, socialist, NAACP member. What did he say? The NRA was supposed to be the cornerstone, the backbone of the New Deal. It's not a cornerstone. What it is a millstone around the neck of black people. It doesn't seem like black people like the New Deal all that much. And thankfully, the Supreme Court realized that it was unconstitutional, and they ruled the NRA, the National Recovery Act, unconstitutional. You cannot create these wage standards. The government doesn't have the right to do these, blah, blah, blah. And black people celebrated. It was awesome. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Dealers responded by just repassing a new version of the NRA called the Wagner Act, which would set up the National Labor Relations Board, which would institute the same exact policies. Wait a second, we just said that was illegal. You're just going to do it over? We just said, the Supreme Court just said, you can't do that. And your response is to do it again? So, in the original Wagner Act, there was a clause that said unions could not discriminate against blacks. Okay, so that's better. We got rid of the NRA, and not we, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, and FDR is going to push it through again, even though he wasn't allowed to, but he pushes it through again, but at least this time, they're going to prevent the unions from discriminating against the blacks. If you allow blacks to join the unions, so if you're protecting union workers, well, then you're also going to protect blacks. So, hey, that's going to work out. And Kelly Miller, president of Howard University, kind of a big deal, said, hey, blacks are doomed without that clause. Unions could not discriminate against blacks. At least that's in the original Wagner Act. Yeah, you know which way this is going to go. So the AFL-CIO, the thing when it comes to unions, comes along and says, we're going to need you to take that one out, Mr. Wagner. And so, of course, like, pretty racist, isn't it, right? They say, no. We need to let the unions discriminate against blacks. Thanks. Cool. Awesome. What? There it is. And so now, yes, they could prevent blacks from joining the unions. So then when these NRA laws protect unions, they're not protecting blacks. Say it with me. The New Deal was racist. Probably didn't teach that in middle school. Maybe they talked about it for 2 seconds and said, that's no big deal. That's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. Most New Dealers thought that discrimination against blacks was an acceptable and inevitable cost of economic recovery. Wait a second. Now we want to listen to Thomas Sowell. Now liberals and progressives want to accept, oh, well, there's trade-offs. Sometimes you got to accept trade-offs. Now you're willing to embrace trade-offs. Now when it comes to racism, when it comes to discriminating, you're okay with trade-offs. You're okay with the constrained vision. How is that possible? But that's the way it is. So this is, again, New Dealers thought that discrimination, hey, it's okay, because in the end, we're going to save the country. So it's okay to save the country, but who cares about the minorities? Who cares about the blacks? In the end, we're going to save the country. They can sacrifice. And so if you're looking like, oh, where did he get that? That's from A New Deal for Blacks by Harvard Sitkoff. You can check the references if you want, or just, again, read Race and Economics. The New Dealers, the socialists, the progressives. Today, the progressives and the socialists love the New Deal. You realize that the progressives and the socialists back then were willing to discriminate against minorities. We're okay with that. You know, the ends justify the means. What? You're willing to accept trade-offs. All right, so basically, give the union workers a raise, fire the black people. Hey, man, you guys will be willing to accept trade-offs. Yeah, that's the trade-off. You're going to mess up and cheat the minorities to help out the white people. Boy, it's very interesting that this is the trade-off, that you're willing to accept, progressives. It's great. All right, so anyway, though, the Supreme Court they got rid of the NRA, and so they're going to rule that the Wagner Act is unconstitutional too, because it is unconstitutional, besides just the discrimination part, but also with the economic policies that the federal government has no right to get involved in. So the Supreme Court's going to rule that unconstitutional again, but then FDR threatens them with, hey, I'm just going to pack the courts. If you keep ruling my New Deal plans unconstitutional, I want to pack the courts so that they all favor me, which is a step too far. But anyway, he makes the threat, and if he does that, then every law that he passes, he'll have all of his justices on the Supreme Court, and all of his justices will approve of his king-like actions. And at that point, the 9 Supreme Court justices back down and say, all right, we're going to stop ruling your stuff unconstitutional, but please promise to never pack the court. And thank goodness we never packed the court. And thank goodness a standard was set, and liberals and Democrats and progressives never packed the court. Well, we'll see about that one. Anyway, the court did not get packed. People were saying, but the Wagner Act and discrimination stays in place. The New Deal stays in place, and black people get cheated again. Thanks, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, what did the National Labor Relations Board, that part of the Wagner Act, what did it say about segregation? It said it's all right. Look, you've been taught about the New Deal your whole life. You've been taught about, oh, we saved the country. Yeah, you might have saved, well, you didn't save the country. It didn't work. We already looked through those data points. But the part they're not telling you is they intentionally cheated over minorities. 1930, the unemployment rate. Blacks had a lower unemployment rate than whites, 5% to 6%. Wow. That's impressive. Now, how was that possible? Because blacks were able to accept lower wages to make up for their they compensate for differences in skill. Since then, you passed the NRA, and black employment has always now been higher than white unemployment for the last 90 years. So good job, New Deal. Before this, black unemployment was lower. There were more percentage-wise blacks working than whites. It's never happened since the New Deal. It's kind of racist. So how does the Wagner Act technically do all this? So the trick here is it allows the unions to have a monopoly of labor. Now, this is kind of hard to understand. Most people get how a monopoly works, but when we start talking about labor unions being monopolies of labor, it's kind of tricky for someone to grasp. So let's dial it backwards, and let's just talk about a basic monopoly like epinephrine pens. If you have an EpiPen, let's say that someone has a monopoly of this product, meaning they control all of the EpiPens. And if you want to buy an EpiPen, you must buy it off of them. They control them all. And when they control them all, they have no competition. They get to name their own price. And so they jack the price up. And there are able to do this because, oh, you're going to buy one from someone else? Oh, sorry, they don't make one. If you need an EpiPen, you've got to buy it from us. And if you don't buy our price, then you don't get one. Oh, you're mad? Oh, you're refusing to purchase these? Okay, well, tell me how the anaphylaxis works out for you. Maybe next time you'll pay my price. Now, that's a monopoly on EpiPens. Basically, like you can see in the picture, she's got a monopoly on toys. You want a toy, you got to do what she wants. You got to pay her price. So it's easy to understand monopoly when we're talking about a tangible good or a product. Kind of harder to understand when we talk about labor, but it's not. It's the same thing. You control all the EpiPens. What if you control all the labor? What if you control all the workers? So the guy owns a factory. He needs to hire workers. Just like when you want an EpiPen, you go to the EpiPen producers. You want a worker. Well, now because of the Wagner Act, you've got to go to the labor union. You can't just shop around for the best employee and look at prices. You got to go to the labor union. They control all of the toys here, all of the workers. And so the union worker now controls it all, just like when they control all the EpiPens, they jack the price up on you. If you control all of the workers, guess what you can do? Jack up the price. That's how this works. So instead of EpiPens being what you control and hoard and collect and name the price of, it's workers. That's how the Wagner Act sets up the National Labor Relations Board, and that's how they set up this minimum wage. Again, minimum wage is really not a fair way of describing it, but either way, that's how it works. So let's look at an example where we don't have monopoly. So roll it all back, no Wagner Act, no National Labor Board. Quick fact that we got to get out of the way. Low-skilled workers tend to be youth and minorities. Oh, this is where people get hung up. So you agree that young workers have less skills, and if you have less skills, you should be paid less. All right, cool. The minorities thing kind of hangs people up. Again, there are 2 minimum wage videos you can check out on my YouTube channel to figure that out, but I'll just quickly go over it. So let's say Hispanics as a minority group, low skilled. Are you calling Hispanics low skilled? Well, if you're Hispanic and you don't speak English, that is a skill you're lacking. And so obviously you have less skill than this person. So if you do not speak English versus someone that does speak English, they have one more skill than you, and that one skill is kind of important in an English-speaking country, and sometimes they get paid more than you. You probably get that one. So now we get to blacks, which is a little bit even trickier, but historically, for many different reasons, blacks tend to have lower education. And with a lower education level, they have less skill. And you can look at many of the reasons why. Whatever you want to decide, you can go through all that as well. It's talked about in the other 2 videos. I'm not going to go in depth into that in this video. But for whatever reasons, because of lack of education, blacks tend to have fewer skills. And so they are lower in skill compared to typically white workers. And if you have fewer skills, you are not worth as much in terms of labor. So in an example where we do not have monopoly, where we do not have the Wagner Act or NRA or the National Relations Board, in a fantasy world where the New Deal never existed, he needs workers. This worker is willing to work for 8. This worker says, I'm worth 13. This is how the low-skilled worker compensates for the differences. If the low-skilled worker asks for 13, well, then the employer is going to take this worker with more skill. But now it's a possibility, and we'll say that it happens, that the minority, the youth, the black American gets hired because that worker is allowed to offer their wages at a lower rate. This is a freedom that they are allowed. Now, that's a fantasy world where these monopolies of labor don't exist. Now, obviously, the union workers' response to this is it took our jobs. Well, first of all, it's not your job. It's anyone's job, and that worker was willing to work for less, so no one took your job. But do you think that the union workers are just going to sit around and take it? The answer is no, they're not just going to sit around and take it. Well, how do they respond? Well, here in our example, the low-wage worker or the low-skilled worker was able to get the job by accepting lower wages. Again, 1930, unemployment rate. Black workers had a lower unemployment rate. A lower percentage of black workers were unemployed. Why? Because they could compensate for the differences. No fault of their own, they were denied education. No fault of their own, they dealt with oppression and a racist past. They accepted it, and a way that they were able to compensate for being unfairly treated was to take lower wages, to build skills and work up and create economic mobility. Well, the union workers don't like that. The union workers don't want to compete. The union workers don't want to lose a job. And so they rebrand this as, we need a minimum wage. No, you're trying to protect your job. The Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Labor Board, the NRA, they raise the minimum wage. They raise the salary of the workers, not necessarily because we need a living standard, to protect job security so these labor unions, these skilled workers, don't have to compete against low-skilled workers to take their jobs. How do you prevent that? You pass laws that exclude or prevent these low-skilled workers for compensating for their differences. You jack the price up. Again, it's always rebranded. We need a minimum wage. No, what's really happening is you're protecting these workers and you're excluding these workers and you're taking a power from the low-skilled worker. You're taking a power from the Black American. You're taking a power from the minority or from the youth. You're taking away their one negotiation, their one tool, and now they don't get a job. What was it? You were just protecting. You're giving them more work. And now here's another example of something the Wagner Act did. So the workers can go on strike. They want more money, whatever. Well, what can typically happen in the past was the worker would just, or the boss would just hire minority workers, youth workers, low-skilled workers for less. Oh, you're going to go strike because you want more money? Well, we're going to go hire these guys. And this led to economic opportunities for Black Americans, for Hispanics, for youth. Well, the Wagner Act said, no, you can't do that anymore. The New Deal is racist. The Wagner Act explicitly said that employers could not hire scabs. What's a scab? Hire low-skilled workers that are willing to replace these union workers. That was outlawed. So basically, you had to pay him no matter what. You were barred from hiring low-skilled workers. Translation, minorities. Translation, Black Americans. The New Deal was racist. The minimum wage. Here's another result of the minimum wage. They were talking about this 100 years ago. We're still talking about this today. Just because the law says you got to pay me $15, you don't have to hire me. You can find another way. And guess what? Industries have been finding a new way ever since. Oh, I got to pay people $15 an hour? Well, I'll just make machines do it. I'll just create robots. I don't have to pay them $15 an hour. They don't go on strike. They don't complain. They don't stop working. So yeah, okay, cool, $15 an hour. I got it. I guess what? I'm just going to fire everybody and hire machines. Gunnar Myrdal, your liberal professor, loved this guy, but what did Gunnar Myrdal have to say? Gunnar Myrdal said, oh yeah, this minimum wage, it's going to decrease jobs. It's going to lead to mechanization and all the way. Also, it'll probably get rid of entire industries, because some industries are only able to exist because they're allowed to pay people very low wages. They're working on very thin margins. The only reason we're able to produce these goods right now is because they can pay people very little. You take that away, entire industries are going to be destroyed and jobs will drop with this. This is not going to help minorities. This is Gunnar Myrdal, one of the leading experts when it came to how do we help minorities in this country, saying minimum wage, bad idea. Don't do it. Don't do it, NRLB. So again, you got the union passing this law that raises basically the wages of the employees. Now, I know it's a hang-up when I'm like, oh, the whole minority thing really strikes people for whatever reason. It throws them off when we try to talk about minimum wage and the problems with the government mandating a wage. So just let's say high-skilled workers versus low-skilled workers. Take race out of it. That'll make it much more comfortable for you. $13 an hour versus $8 an hour. A lot of businesses, a lot of industry are going to hire the low-skilled worker at $8 an hour, maybe use some of that money they save to train that worker, whatever. But obviously, they're not in industry or business to be a charity. They're in it to make money. And so to increase their profits, you hire workers at a lower wage. But when the Wagner Act and the union workers work together to force prices up, this gives jobs to high-skilled workers. So what really is happening here? When you pass the Wagner Act, when the New Deal institutes a minimum wage, what they're doing is protecting high-skilled labor. That's what this does. It's creating a protection for these union workers. They're picking winners. They're picking losers. They're doing a favor by protecting high-skilled workers, by giving them probably more money than they need, but also not making them compete with other labor, preventing them to have to compete with other labor. How do they compete with other labor? Well, other labor or other workers, low-skilled labor, competes with high-skilled labor by accepting lower wages, which drives wages down, which ultimately then will drive wages up. That's too much for most people to understand. But by the way, you're preventing them from getting into that competition. So by protecting them, you are discriminating against low-skilled labor. The New Deal is discriminating against low-skilled labor by picking this winner and choosing this loser. By the New Deal setting up the Wagner Act and the National Relations Labor Board, or National Labor Relations Board, whichever way it is. By setting that up, they're protecting this worker. But by protecting this worker, you're discriminating against this worker. You're hurting the low-skilled worker. And who tends to be the low-skilled worker that we're discriminating against? And not by we, I mean the government, I mean FDR, I mean the New Dealer. Who are they discriminating against to protect? It tends to be youth and minorities. The New Deal, very racist. It's shocking, absolutely shocking to see progressives and liberals and socialists constantly going back. We need another New Deal. Oh, we need to be racist again? You mean when you were willing to accept racism, when you're willing to accept discriminating against minorities to help out a protected class? We need to bring that back? Probably not. Probably not. So that was Race and Economics by Walter E. Williams. I encourage you to check out that book. And as always, subscribe, share, like the videos. Thank you.